we would. Sorry. Rules Committee come to order, and thank you very much for joining us. Another beautiful day back at the Rules Committee. Today, the Rules Committee will consider the Senate Amendment to H.R. 88, Retirement Savings and Other Tax Relief Act of 2018. The Senate Amendment to H.R. 88 modifies and makes permanent the railroad track maintenance credit. The bill also provides tax relief for business and individuals affected by Hurricanes Florence, Michael, Typhoons Manhunt, and Yutan, the tropical storms Jita, and the California fires, also the volcanic eruptions that took place in Hawaii, and severe storms in Alabama, Hawaii, Indiana, North Carolina, Wisconsin, and my home state of Texas. Additionally, the amendment helps provide businesses retirement plans to their workers and helps families start saving a little bit earlier. It allows business to write off more of their initial investment. Startup cost bill includes core provisions from the Family Savings Act, which passed the House in September as part of Tax Reform 2. This legislation builds upon the critical reforms as seen in H.R. 1, and all across the country, our constituents and small businesses are benefiting from these historic reforms. As we know, we have more people working in America today than ever in the history of the country. We have more revenue coming in than the history of the country. Today, we have an opportunity to build upon this. We think it's a wonderful time to meet, and so we have two of the crack members of the Ways and Means Committee, Mr. Neal and the young chairman from Texas, Mr. Brady, and we welcome you both to the committee. But before we move further, we're going to hear from the ranking member, the distinguished gentleman from Massachusetts, for any opening statements the distinguished gentleman would like to make. The distinguished gentleman from Worcester, Massachusetts is recognized.
And he pronounced it right, finally. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the witnesses for being here. This tax bill is so unpopular that it was already pulled once from floor consideration. Essentially, this bill is the ghost of Christmas past, and only this version is even worse than before. It would repeal the Johnson Amendment prohibiting houses of worship from endorsing or opposing a political candidate. It would add another $100 billion to the national debt, and it doesn't even help working Americans. And why are we talking? Why are we taking this up now? The Senate today finally moved to pass a short-term spending bill to keep the government open through February 8th. And then they're leaving town, not for a day, not for a week, but likely for the rest of this Congress. So we'd be sending this bill to an empty chamber. But the Republicans are still in charge for a few more days. So again, I thank the witnesses for being here today. But for the life of me, I don't quite understand what the point of this exercise is. And with that, I yield back.
Appreciate the gentleman's comments. We're going to have two witnesses who will be able to not only to elaborate on their ideas, knowing Mr. Neal as I do, he's not been shy about letting us know his ideas. Also, the distinguished gentleman from Texas. So without accepting anything you brought in writing will be available to our distinguished young, awesome stenographer this evening. Richie, she's learned to speak here Massachusetts, Texas, all sorts of things, Florida, and she gets it right every time. So we're delighted to have her with us. Mr. Chairman, we're going to have you kick this off. Tell us about all this great opportunity to continue the economic growth, development, jobs, job creation, investment, and opportunity to provide more money to the Treasury next year and the coming years than we've ever had. The success of a rain dance has a lot to do with time, and distinguished gentlemen is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Sessions, Ranking Member McGovern, members of the Rules.
Sir, can you make sure that, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Ranking Member McGovern, members of the Rules Committee. First, Chairman, thank you for your leadership of this committee. For so many years, you've shepherded historic legislation, and legislation has frankly improved the lives of every American. So thank you. As a fellow Texan and a member of your class, thank you for your class act as chairman of this committee. You've made a huge difference in America. So I'll be very brief about testifying today. So the main reason of why, the answer is we've got a lot of families, California, Carolinas, that are staring at burned out homes and homes they can't return to that need disaster tax relief now in this tax year when they can use it immediately. I think it's irresponsible to wait until next year to deliver this crucial tax relief for families in 14 states and territories. We're struggling to recover from devastating wildfires, hurricanes, flooding, and other storms. I think both parties have always come together to help these communities now in a bipartisan manner. And why it matters is that this package ensures people can write off their personal casualty losses now in the current tax year, not wait a year for it. It makes sure the victims can immediately access the retirement funds penalty-free to be able to rebuild. For small businesses trying to figure out, how can I pay my workers when the economy just isn't there? This provides them relief right now in this quarter so they can keep their workers on the payroll as they try to figure out how they can survive these tough times. I think the reason we need to continue to push forward is we can and should and will help these communities rebuild. Package is more than that. You're familiar. The bill, we're offering bipartisan tax relief from some of the Affordable Care Act's most egregious taxes. Ones we've agreed on, Republicans and Democrats, relief from the Cadillac tax, a 5-year relief from the medical device tax, which passed the House with 58, permanent repeal, passed with 58 Democrat votes, the health insurance tax that drives up costs for everyone who owns or has a health care plan, and the tanning taxes. These harmful taxes stifle innovation, reduce jobs, and increase the cost of families' health insurance. The package will also help families save more and earlier throughout their lives, something we've worked together as Republicans and Democrats between the Family Savings Act in the House and the RISA bill in the Senate. It makes it easier for local businesses to offer their workers retirement plans. We also have spent now 3 years working together in a bipartisan manner to reach solid common ground on our efforts to redesign and restructure the IRS. Our bill, offering clarity and certainty to taxpayers, led by Lynn Jenkins of Kansas and John Lewis of Georgia, received near unanimous support in the House earlier this year. It's time to send these reforms to the President's desk, ensure the IRS is an agency with one singular mission: quality taxpayer service. Next, temporary tax policy is hardly ever good economic policy. Our tax code needs to reflect that. We have an opportunity here to set a new tone for how we treat these temporary extenders moving forward each year. Working with the Senate and stakeholders, we were able to phase out the extension for biodiesel while making permanent the railroad track maintenance credit at a reduced level. Hopefully, these industries and individuals impacted by the remaining temporary tax provisions will step forward and work with incoming Chairman Neal, myself, and the Senate and voice their support for permanent solutions where we as a Congress believe there is merit moving forward. And so I think we ought to reward good behavior when these industries are trying to find good solutions that make the tax code more permanent and more certainty. Also, we proactively eliminate any potential uncertainty for our community organizations and churches so nothing distracts them from their core mission. Finally, working closely with the public and members on both sides of the aisle, we've identified some minor technical corrections to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, a very normal part of the legislative process. These are minor, but they're very important changes to ensure our new tax code works as intended so Main Street can continue to hire, grow, and invest in their communities. I believe the package will have a meaningful impact for families and businesses across the country. Look forward to working with you. We do know the hour is late, but this session is not adjourned. Let's do all that we can while we can provide some help. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Distinguished gentleman from Massachusetts recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to Ranking Member McGovern. And I do want to reiterate, I want to wish you your all achievement opportunity as you move from this institution. I considered you a friend while you were here. I think we agreed more in conversations in the gym than we did here in more of a public setting. But I do want to wish you well.
Sure, thank you very much.
So let me start by saying I oppose the bill. 2 weeks ago, Chairman Brady and I sat in these same two chairs and debated a different version of this legislation. However, instead of working together on a bipartisan basis to strengthen the bill, our Republican colleagues have instead made it worse by including things like repealing the Johnson Amendment. Last year, the GOP crafted its tax bill behind closed doors and hastily passed it without a single hearing. On Election Day, 49% of the American people opposed it and 41% supported it. And because of that rushed process, there are tremendous problems with the legislation. Now, a year later, Republicans are pushing through another package with fixes to their tax law. Fixes. This is without a single hearing, without another witness coming forward, and without having a chance to vet the merits of the proposed changes. A rushed and lopsided process resulted in this tax law. And now Republicans want to duplicate that process with changes at the last minute. We've received the 2-minute warning. The game is almost over. Time to move on. In my opinion, it's critical that the Ways and Means Committee return to what we call around here the regular order. And one of our priorities in the next Congress is to have oversight hearings on the tax bill that our Republican colleagues passed. Before making any changes, we'll examine each fix thoroughly and have it explored in public debate. Whether it's substantive or technical, that's the path we intend to follow. That's how we'll avoid making many of the kinds of problems that we are seeing here this evening. Another reason I oppose this bill is because of the disaster provisions. 2 months ago, when the Ways and Means Committee marked up its so-called Tax Reform 2.0, we offered an amendment to ensure that the victims of natural disasters nationwide would be eligible for disaster tax relief regardless of where their communities were located. Unfortunately, because of Republican opposition, that amendment failed. Well, I'm pleased that this bill is moving in the right direction by extending relief to victims of the most recent disaster that our nation has endured. I disagree with the approach our Republican colleagues are taking here. We should instead take a national approach to disaster relief. We call that summarily the national principle. We cannot turn our backs on any member of the communities that represent our nation. We want to make sure that those who need the help most get it expeditiously, and we need to provide a path to help them get back on their feet. I'm also opposing this legislation because it's not offset. For the third time this year, Republicans are asking for significant tax law changes without paying for them. In fact, it's an egregious act of fiscal malpractice, and the Republican Party is actually removing any bipartisan effort to find offsets from the retirement section of this legislation. Today's bill once again demonstrates that Republicans don't want to embrace their historic argument of being the champions of fiscal conservative thought. This bill significantly erodes the Johnson Amendment by allowing certain tax-exempt organizations to make political statements during the ordinary course of their activities. This is a dangerous precedent. And I must say, as a professor and teacher of history in a former life, one of the great things that the framers of our constitutional system embraced and freed us from the conflict in the rest of the world was the idea that we would embrace the idea of unity without uniformity, but without making strident political commentary, whether it be at services or religious undertakings. Since 1954, the Johnson Amendment has ensured that tax-exempt organizations, including churches and houses of worship, do not endorse or oppose political candidates from the pulpit. For decades, this policy has shielded our nation's charitable community against partisan politics and allowed it to work in furtherance of its mission in a nonpartisan manner. I strongly oppose returning this provision. The health tax provisions in this bill do nothing to increase accountability for the device industry, employers, or health insurance. If we are going to provide tax relief to corporations, we should have guarantees that savings will be reinvested in innovation. And I must tell you, I think it is beyond dispute, when we have now had an opportunity 1 year out to survey what happened with the benefits of the tax bill, overwhelmingly, the benefits went to corporations in terms of share buybacks and dividends. We had a chance to do this because we all acknowledged that we had to do something with the tax code. We decided to go it alone with one party, and that's why we're back here this evening trying to address some of these challenges and problems as we go forward. It wasn't just about shareholders that needed some relief. It was about the middle class in America that needed that relief. And I hope in the coming year that we'll have a chance to revisit many of those proposals and make sure that the middle class will once again turn to us in terms of support for the needs that they have every day across the country as well. Thanks for the invitation to have me here today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Neal. We're delighted that you're here. Chairman Brady, there was a discussion today about middle class of this country. Middle class of this country had been unemployed for many years. We had the largest number of unemployed African Americans, largest number of unemployed youth that were in this country. This last summer, as I recall, you would know better the dates, you would know better the numbers. We had some 9 million jobs looking for people. 9 million extra jobs looking for people, as opposed to 9 million people looking for jobs just several years before. How did that happen?
Mr. Chairman, it wasn't by accident. So under the slow growth, really anti-growth policies of President Obama, our economy slowed to less than 2%. It was the slowest recovery in many of our lifetimes. And every economist told us that the new normal in America is you'll never grow more than 2%. Our families, our young people coming out of college and school, their opportunities would be so-so at best, and we could just get used to watching our jobs and companies move overseas. We knew there was a different potential. And now, because of this tax code in just more than a year, we've gone from a nation asking where are the jobs to now we ask where are the workers. At every business, it seems like across the country, starving for workers. We also now have seen the lowest unemployment rates for many of the underdogs in our community, especially whether it's African Americans, Hispanic Americans, disabled, teenagers. Part-time jobs are now full-time jobs. And for those workers who didn't get a high school degree, not even a GED, they are always the ones who are laid off first. They're always the ones rehired last. Their unemployment is at the best since America started measuring it. So wages are going up for the first time in a decade. Unemployment as low as it is in 50 years, economists, including the Fed, believe it will go even lower. It'll get even better for unemployment. And so I think we have the fundamentals right for this economy. I still believe the long-term benefit of a competitive tax code is really long-term. So I think this growth is important. And by the way, we will finish this year with something we never saw under President Obama, which is 3% annual growth in America. Our average used to be 3.3 for half a decade. That hope went away. Well, we've restored it, and we've got more work to do, no question about that. We continue to fine-tune, make technical corrections. We look forward to working with the new majority in the House on any fine-tuning or changes that can grow this economy more.
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to disagree with you, but many disabled people are last to get jobs also.
Absolutely.
Those that have one way or another retina issues, and those that are disabled by other intellectual or physical disabilities. So they have been included in this march and drive as an opportunity. And one of the things which you and I have been careful is to try and track that ability that people. Mr. Neal, what are we going to, I heard you oppose this, but the numbers that Mr. Brady talked about are current records. You're going to do better?
So let's start with one of the theories.
We don't like what numbers we're pointing at?
Yeah, why don't we start with one of the theories that was offered, and that this all happened in the last 2 years. So the stock market has been going up since March of 2009, and we've now had 97 straight months of economic growth. But I want to attach one caveat, which I think is interesting. We've discussed this here in the past. Revenue now is at 16.9% of GDP. We're back to what happened during the Bush years, when revenue slipped to 15.5% while we engaged 2 wars, and we borrowed $2.3 trillion based on what the Fed did again today with raising interest rates. That's what this is going to come out to after 10 years, $2.3 trillion for a tax cut whose benefits overwhelmingly went to people at the top, furthering wealth concentration in America. Well, we accepted the idea you had to do something about the corporate tax rate. President Obama recommended a 28% rate. David Camp recommended a 25% rate. So we go to 21%, and now we're finding out from many of the stakeholders across the country that this was not what they had in mind. So you wouldn't dispute the assertion that I've offered, that the overwhelming benefit here has gone to shareholders in terms of buybacks and to dividend expansion.
So that's the stock market?
No, those are separate issues, but I'm saying that the average American, for the most part,
There are people
is
who
not in
own
the stock
stocks,
market.
though.
I'm saying that you're making the argument that this all happened, or allegedly, the argument is that this all happened on the day that President Trump took office. I'm saying
Oh,
there's been
no,
a
no,
steady
no.
period of growth coming out of the worst recession since the Depression at the end of the Bush years to where we find ourselves today. Believe me, Mr. Chairman, you should understand, we're cheering for economic growth. We all want to see that happen.
Yeah, I think it happened about 30 days after the president took office, not immediately. I think it took off then.
Well, we had a decade of less than 2% growth, averaging 1.9%. That was the new normal under President Obama. Now it's much higher than that. And I would point out 3 out of every $4 in the tax reform bill goes to individuals, middle-class families, Main Street businesses. And as a result, that's why we see consumer confidence, again, continuing at very, very high levels, and Main Street optimism at record levels as well.
Well, I think this is an analogy of a team that scores touchdowns as opposed to teams that score defensive touchdowns, which is what happened during President Obama's time. We need an offense. We needed to actually make money and provide that incentive back to us. Boy, I'm going to miss these fun times. I'm just going to miss them. Mr. Chairman, Barbara Angus is your senior tax counsel. I hope somebody's able to thank her for the strong work that she's done. We thanked, I saw Towner French in here. Towner used to be the deputy staff director here at the Rules Committee. He came by just to see a little bit of fun. But I want to highlight all of our staffs, your staff, Mr. Neal, your staff, the work that they've done, the opportunity to make this happen. I know we're nearing Christmas. We ought to thank them, but sincerely, we appreciate the hard work and respect that enormously to that. Mr. Chairman?
Amen.
Well, I won't take a lot of time. I want to thank both gentlemen for being here and for my good friend, the chairman, pushing right to the very end. And I look at these things, and for the most part, these are pretty non-controversial. I don't think any of us are against helping people in disaster situations with appropriate tax relief. And the health taxes we've dealt with in a bipartisan way again and again, many of these things. So this seems very commonsensical to me, and a little bit of needed cleanup that always happens after a big piece of tax legislation. So I just want to commend both gentlemen for working hard to the end, and look forward to supporting this when it gets to the floor.
Thanks, sir.
Yield back.
That's an aye vote for you, Mr. Brady.
It is.
Yes, sir.
There's one.
Judge Hastings?
Thanks, sir.
Yes, Mr.
Good
Chairman.
to see you, sir.
It's a pleasure.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, can you tell me whether or not this is going to be our last session of the Rules Committee?
I do not know. I would guess that it's pretty darn close. It's a runner-up if not.
All right. The only reason I asked was I wanted to follow and echo the sentiments of Mr. Neal regarding you, and to express my appreciation for the years of work that you have done here on the Rules Committee, laboring with us all through good times and bad. And I appreciate your friendship. We've had lots of robust discussion over the course of time, but have maintained our friendship.
Yes, sir.
And I just want to express my appreciation for your handling this committee. Toward that end, I do have questions. And Mr. Neal, let me ask you, was there a hearing regarding this matter that we are here on today?
There was no hearing on this.
Was there a markup?
There was no markup on this.
Were you
legislation.
consulted?
I was not consulted on this.
Do you know of any of the other members of the Ways and Means Committee?
I'm not
or
aware of any of the other
Democrats that-
members of the Ways and Means Committee having been consulted.
Would it be accurate to say that not only have a lot of Democrats not been consulted, but some Republicans have not been consulted as well?
Well, I can't speak to that with any certainty, but I do know the haste with which this was drawn strikes me that it would have been very difficult for anybody, given the fact that we're just back from a 6-day weekend, when that could have been accomplished.
Now, Mr. Brady, you know, all of us have been around here when it's time to leave, and you and I and Mr. Sessions, Mr. Cole, and a lot of us on this committee have been around when we get to what I call the Christmas dance. Now, you knew last week that we would come to this position where we're 2 or 3 days from actually closing this session of Congress. Do you anticipate yourself that the Senate will take any action of this measure if it passes?
So I defer to the Senate in their efforts. I know a number of senators from both parties have called eager to send these provisions over because they, as you know, the IRS reforms passed almost unanimously here in the House. That's in here. The retirement savings and package has been bipartisan. The health taxes that we're voting on here, dramatically bipartisan. And I don't know I haven't found a senator yet who says, hey, let's just make families in California, in the Carolinas, wait longer for their disaster leave. And so my thinking is that we will continue to do our work. The Senate will adjourn when they adjourn, but we'll continue to do our work in the House, just as
Well-
I would expect you to do next session.
Yeah, well, it's pretty much certain, based on what Leader McConnell has said, that they're going to leave here. And therefore, whatever we do, assume we go and exercise the process here and this measure passes, I don't think the Senate was ever going to consider this partisan legislation in the first place. And now they aren't even going to be in town to be able to do so. But I agree with you that we will be able to go forward and doubtless do something that will really help. We talk about the middle class, but the group that is just below the middle class are also hurting. There was an exit poll, and I'm not one that places a lot of faith in snapshots in time, but one of the exit polls recently said that only 28% of Americans surveyed said that the Republicans' tax bill helped them, and 45% reported no impact, and 23% of the people that were polled in that exit poll said that the bill hurt them. Now, the harsh reality is this. As all of us are politicians and keen observers of politics, I noticed around the country, as well as in the state that I'm proud to serve and in my constituency, that my Republican colleagues stopped even talking about the tax bill and joined us, quite frankly, in something that I believe that every member of Congress and the House and the Senate believe in, and that is that we need to do something about pre-existing conditions, especially, and the cost of prescription drugs. That became the mantra of a lot of politicians who won and lost their elections. But I found it interesting that we left here with y'all touting your tax bill, and then you stopped talking about it. So it couldn't have been all that popular if you stopped talking about it. Otherwise, you would have continued along those lines. And let me correct you also, Chairman Brady, on something. Everybody believed that voted for this measure. I believe they believed that corporations were going to gin up hiring and do everything they could to ensure that the benefits that they received, which were considerable, were going to pass on to their employees. Well, all of us in here know what most of them did. They did buybacks. They started, and I could give you the statistics, I won't, but there are a variety of companies that laid off a lot of people. And then we had the recent flap with General Motors, which comes to the point that you made about the uneducated being the first fire. That's not always true. And if you believe that is true, then ask those people in Ohio and Michigan who are fairly well educated and have good jobs that were laid off and likely not to return to employment. So while this is complicated, I just feel that today is much ado about nothing, because this ain't going nowhere. And I appreciate the fact that you all played out the strain, and I'm damn glad you won't have the strain
Thank
to
you,
play
Judge.
out next year.
Look, I appreciate those. I disagree with all of them. Look, that average family 4 in your district making $60,000 a year, that's not much, sees the tax savings $1,670. You've pledged to take that money back for Washington. I'm going to pledge my darndest to keep it in their pocket, and then we'll see what's more popular going forward. I look forward to that debate.
I predict for you, Mr. Brady, that by this time next year, no matter who's in charge of the House or the Senate or the presidency,
These
there's going
cuts
to be a
will be in
downturn
place.
in this economy. And all you have to do is ask Mr. Powell today and his statement regarding cross currents. That's just one little buzz statement that he made, signifying, among other things, the growth that you tout, which I might add, Mr. Neal is absolutely correct. It didn't begin with the present administration.
No,
It has been on a
pretty much
glide
did.
path, and that glide path is getting ready to go in another direction. And so I would urge most of the citizenry to hunker down, and it will be critically important what Mr. Neal and the Ways and Means Committee that are going to be controlled by Democrats, they're going to have a very delicate balance going forward to do what we can. This particular measure is troubling, and I would hope that it wouldn't even pass if it did come to the floor tomorrow, largely for the reason that it leaves out a whole lot of people, particularly those that have disasters. I'm going to try again next year to bring to the attention of this body and this country that we're in an environment where disasters are going to continue. And it is not based on any climate belief. I have argued for a number of years, after seeing what Japan did, knowing that they were going to have earthquakes, Japan established a committee of their diet that dealt specifically with disasters. And this particular Congress needs to establish a committee that will deal with disasters, be they fires, floods, earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, whatever of the disasters, without us having to piddle around the way that we do. I've seen blue roofs in my district that were from hurricanes long time ago. I've seen drought areas that have yet to be repaired. And they're not just in Democrat districts, they're in Republican districts. We need to address this problem, and we need to do so in a significant way. I yield back my time, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. Distinguished gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Mr. Hastings is exactly right, Mr. Chairman. Folks can have it. That's my Christmas gift here on the Rules Committee this cycle. There is a leadership change happening in the Ways and Means Committee. Folks are going to have a delicate balance to walk. Mr. Neal is an able and capable leader, as we all know. And I just want you to know, from my side of the aisle, I'm glad that we have you there as the able and capable balance. I do worry about those revenue numbers that Mr. Neal mentioned. If you're going to have spending above 21% of GDP, probably having revenue down at 16% is not the right balance to reach the fiscal goals that I'd like to see us reach, and my constituents would like to see us reach. I'll wait patiently for the next mega deal that you all create that both brings down those expenditures and sorts out those revenues. But I don't just believe in your policies. I believe in you, and I just want you to know how much it has meant to me in these years of your leading the committee. For Pete's sakes, you did things that folks said could never get done, and that's the thing that I like most about this job. And I see it on both sides of the aisle when folks say, "Dad, you know that Congress, they'll never get it. They'll never get it right. They'll never build the coalition to do it. They'll never get it done." And you heard that every single day of your chairmanship, and you did it anyway.
Thank you, sir.
And I'm grateful for that. I did want to ask you, because all you do is work, all you and Mr. Neal both do is work that impacts people. You don't do anything that doesn't matter. All you work on all day long on the Ways and Means Committee are things that matter. And so as I look at reform, tax cuts have great support. revenue expenditures have great support. Tax reform doesn't have as much support because that actually requires that folks do some more heavy lifting. And part of the reform that you all are working on, I know you've changed the way that our rural electric co-ops would recognize grants that came to them, rather than recognizing them as inside money. They'd be recognized as outside money, which begins to impact the ratios required for their nonprofit status between their inside money
Yep.
and their outside money. Big guys might be able to handle it. Some of the small folks in Georgia are going to have a really tough time with that. Could you tell me a little bit about why that change is being made and whether or not there's something coming down the road that will address this concern?
Yes, so the industry's brought that to our attention, and not only that, there's two other issues here. One is that I think they'd like to do some modernization of the code in the area of those co-ops, which they've working with Representative Adrian Smith and others, yourself and others, in filing legislation that addresses that issue, which is a sort of a very targeted one, and then does some of the new modernization. Also in this bill is a provision that actually reduces their contributions to pensions to sort of reflect the lower risk rate of that in nonprofit organizations like Girl Scouts of America. So they have a very important provision in this bill, but they're also looking to work with us on more fine-tuning in the future.
Okay.
Can I make a point on the revenues?
Please.
So we really don't have a revenue problem in Washington. We have a spending problem. So even with all the tax cuts in place today, we have more revenue this year than last. And the income tax revenue, despite all the cuts in payroll taxes, are up by about $105 billion. That's because more people are going back to work and they're getting paid more. So at the end of this 10 years, our revenue coming in as a percent of GDP will increase to 17.8%. So we are going to grow revenue significantly, even with the tax cuts in place. Our problem is spending's going up to 24%. Therein lies the problem, in my view. Mr. Woodall, I know that's an issue you showed up concerned about and you continue to battle.
Well, it is, and I look forward to seeing how Mr. Neal and under his leadership, the committee tackles that challenge. Because yes, folks said we'd never get a tax bill done. You led, you got a tax bill done, but that next challenge then is what do we do about the expenditures side? All that traffic that moves through the Ways and Means Committee, that's heavy lifting. That's heavy lifting too, and I worry about those things going forward. I know you took some shots at it, and we need both good leaders and good followers. Our problem here in Congress is often we have the good leaders; it's the good followers that we miss out on to follow that strong lead. I will tell you, I don't know what your Christmas plans are, but it's my intention to find a reason to object to any unanimous consent requests that come forward. I don't want this to be our last Rules Committee meeting, Mr. Hastings. There needs to be more said about the fine leadership of our chairman. There needs to be more said about folks who are in the business of building bridges instead of burning them down. There needs to be more said about folks who do things that others won't do. A great leader, friend of mine, said, winners do things that losers just won't do. That great leader is my friend and my chairman, Pete Sessions, and I very much hope that we will be back in this committee room one more time and able to talk about that at great length. But thank you all for giving us a reason to be here tonight. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. Distinguished gentlewoman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if this is our last meeting for this 115th Congress, let me also join in thanking you for your work on this committee. And I know that this has taken a lot of your personal time and family time. So I thank you, and I thank your bride for sharing you with all of us in this Congress. In regards to the agenda that we have before us today, this is a rewrite of what we saw last month with two possible changes. I am disappointed that this was introduced on Monday. I am disappointed that our incoming chairman of the Powerful Ways and Means Committee was not brought into the conversation. I am disappointed that we are utilizing the victims of climate change as a way to try to maneuver a yes vote on something that was already voted down on the floor a month ago. So let's not do this again. Let's figure out a way to work together and to come together and not pretend that we're helping the little guy or the victims of climate change when we really are trying to help our corporate partners. And with that, Mr. Chairman, once again, thank you for the time that you have spent with us in this Congress. Thank you for the hospitality that you have shown us here.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. Distinguished gentlewoman yields back her time. Distinguished gentleman from Louisville, Texas, Dr. Michael Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I find myself in the uncomfortable position of agreeing with the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Woodall. I hope this is not our last opportunity to gather at this dais, because I have enjoyed serving under your chairmanship, and I certainly want to take this opportunity to thank you for the confidence you had in me several years ago, and insisting to then Speaker Boehner that I be part of your team up here. And if the popular legend is you had to go back 5 different times to convince him, but I'm glad that you prevailed, and I hope. Well, it has been truly an honor to serve with you on this dais, and I hope I was worth all of those extra trips you made to Mr. Boehner's office.
Well, I enjoyed it especially when the distinguished gentleman from Hood River, Oregon showed up, and you were put in the conundrum of deciding which was your favorite chairman.
And it's still the jury's still out, but
I would suspect it is.
so let me. And I want to thank our witnesses for being here today, and Mr. Brady, Chairman Brady, I used to be a student of medical irony, and I feel like I've branched out now into legislative irony. I mean, you and I were on the Joint Economic Committee several years ago. We received those jobs numbers on the first Friday of every month until, of course, Democrats were in charge at that time, and then they actually stopped having those hearings where Keith Hall from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Department of Labor, would come in and share with us the grim results of what the previous month's employment had been. I remember those hearings with Christina Romer and Larry Summers, and just the dark clouds were just ahead as far as any eye could see, and there was no hope that things would ever be any better. I mean, those were some of the most depressing hearings that I've ever encountered. And then, I'm willing to admit that perhaps things had started to improve before current administration, President Trump, took office. But I got to tell you, I went back and reviewed my 401k statement from 2015, and it wasn't a pretty picture. I reviewed it from 2017, and it was a significant and marked improvement. Now, I recognize the market's had some volatility and that this year perhaps may not turn out to be as robust as last year was, but that stark difference from the last full year of the Obama administration for the first full year of the Trump administration, 2015, 2017, if people still have their 401k statements in their shoeboxes in their closets, pull those out and look at those. If you have a question in your mind as to whether things really were okay economically during even the last years of the Obama administration, it was not okay. It was 2% growth. We were told this is the new normal, get used to it. It will never be any better. And Mr. Chairman, your comments about the people in the middle class, I mean, it used to be people ran their elections on, we want to take care of the middle class, we want to build up the middle class. Well, the last 2 years, this administration has done just that. The middle class is doing mighty well. Now, I am concerned because when I turn on cable television and I listen to all the talking heads, people who are a lot smarter than economic things than I am, will talk about, just as we heard from the other side of the dais, that there is there is now we're on the cusp of an economic downturn. It's almost as if they are willing and wanting that to happen so that then they can point to President Trump, say, see, he didn't really know how to make the economy better for you, and now it's getting worse. But they're trying to talk down the economy. I can remember when George W. Bush first took office in March of 2001, and he made mention of the fact that it seemed like the economy was a little shaky, and Tom Daschle and all of these folks jumped on him, said, don't talk down the economy, for heaven's sakes, you'll spook investors and the market will come down. And it'll be a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I'm telling you, I cannot turn on the television now without hearing some smart person talk about this is the end of this economic expansion. Well, nonsense. Nonsense. The only reason that should happen is if we turn our attention away from things that have actually delivered this economic revival to this country and, in fact, rebuilt the middle class. And we should be rejoicing on that. Look, Congressional Budget Office, no secret, I've had my beef with them this past 2 years. Where is the Congressional Budget Office figure on the number of people who are covered by employer-sponsored insurance and ERISA plan today that weren't covered 2 years ago? If the economy has added 2.5 million jobs, in my limited way of thinking about things, those are 2.5 million people that may have the availability of employer-sponsored insurance. And if they're a family where there is a spouse or perhaps a child who might be covered under that policy, that could be 2.5 to 5 million people who now have coverage who did not have it under the Obama economy. That should be something to celebrate. We should be grateful for that, unless you really want only the government to be in charge of your health care, and you don't want people to be in charge of their own health care, and you certainly don't want them to get it from their employer. I don't even understand why someone would make that kind of an argument. It seems counter to everything that that certainly I've been taught. But the concept of people talking down the economy to hurt this administration is one that it bothers me significantly. And it bothers me because, like you, I sat in that Joint Economic Committee. I heard those dire warnings from Christina Romer and Larry Summers and all the smart people that President Obama had gathered around him, and they weren't able to figure it out. We had a stimulus, but it didn't work, and we probably need another one, and it needs to be bigger. Well, here we are now, 2 years into this Trump administration, and the sunshine has been shining, and look, I've served when there's a bad economy and a good economy, and I know this purely, I'm not schooled in political science. I was schooled in the biological sciences, but I do know this. I look a lot smarter if there's a good economy, and that's what I want. So I thank you, Mr. Brady, for the work you did on the tax reform. I am grateful that you're bringing this before us today. Can I just ask you a question on what you refer to as the Cadillac tax? And I see the Section 302 in the bill that you've got before us, and really we're not getting rid of it, we're just delaying it.
Delaying it. So the medical device tax delayed 5 years. The health insurance tax, 2-year delay. And then the Cadillac tax, which punishes workers who get good health care at work.
You anticipated my question.
Is being delayed in a year, which Republicans, Democrats have long agreed.
And would you
shouldn't be
articulate, just in case anyone is watching this and doesn't understand what a Cadillac tax is that you're going to tax my car? No, we're going to tax your health insurance benefit if it's too generous.
We will punish the business if they give you health care that the government says is too good for you. And not only that, the health insurance tax adds another tax to you, whether you're in wherever you get your health insurance out, raises premiums 4 to 5%. So in this bill, we are making health care more affordable for workers and for families, regardless of whether they get their health care.
And let me just add one other thing on people who get their insurance through their employment through an ERISA plan. I heard pre-existing conditions mentioned. Under an ERISA plan, there is no exclusion for pre-existing conditions. Once a person is through the probationary part of their employment, they receive their insurance coverage regardless of previous health history. And that is not from the Affordable Care Act. That is from a group of laws called ERISA from 1972 or 1974. I think it was Senator Javits in New York, a Republican. But that protection on pre-existing conditions, if we expand the employer-sponsored pool, we are in fact protecting more people against being charged an additional penalty for a pre-existing condition. And I think that's a good thing, it's something we should celebrate. So again, thank you for bringing this bill, and I think we need to do everything we can, not to damage the economy, but to encourage the economy and encourage the American worker, because after all, they're the ones who've actually brought us this prosperity. It hadn't been us, hadn't been the president, it's been the American worker.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Dr. Burgess, thank you very much. Professor Burgess. The distinguished gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Byrne.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if this is our last meeting or not, but I'm going to go ahead and say something. You're one of the most decent people I've ever known in my life. You're one of the most fair people I've ever known in my life. And you've conducted yourself up here as our chairman with grace, and it's made our work here a lot easier that you did. You also took a lot of arrows for other people, and so we should all thank you for doing that and doing that in the way that you've done it. And I will never forget your leadership here, and I appreciate it. I appreciate these two gentlemen, too, and I mean that when I call you gentlemen. Y'all are both gentlemen of the highest order, and I appreciate your work on this. And when we talk about the deficit, I have one simple question for the American people. How much government are you willing to pay for? And sometimes we want more government than we're willing to pay for. And I think we need to just say that. This is how much money we're willing to pay, and let's get the government down to how much we're willing to pay for it. And the truth of the matter is, we're not willing to take 20% of the gross domestic product of the United States and pay for federal government. We're not willing to do that. Now, we dance around that by saying we're going to make the rich people pay for it. Well, I've read the studies. We could tax the rich 100%, and we still couldn't come up with enough revenue to get to 20% of GDP. It doesn't work. So let's be honest and ask ourselves, we represent the American people, how much money are we willing to pay for government? And I'm telling you, it's not 20% of GDP. Well, having said that, I think what it really means is we ought to have a talk with ourselves. We're supposed to be the leaders. What do we need to do to bring the government within the means of what the American people want to pay for? And that means we've got to talk about the 2/3 of what we spend that we don't appropriate, and that is mandatory spending. I've been looking at how much we're spending last fiscal year for Medicaid and food stamps and comparing it to what it looked like in the recession. Because you would think with this economy the way it is, those numbers would come way down because people have jobs. They don't need Medicaid and food stamps. Well, it hadn't. Why not? Well, we don't even get to ask that question because we don't appropriate that money. And if we're not willing to ask that question, and we're not willing to actually go in there and ask the hard questions about where we spend money across the board. I'm on armed services. I think it is absolutely imperative that we ask the Pentagon, now that we have an audit on them, why do you spend money this way? I think we have an obligation to do that. But we have an obligation to do it across the board. Until we're willing to do that, then sometimes I think tax policy is getting out ahead of fiscal policy. I'm not saying what you're doing is wrong, I'm just saying we need to understand that tax policy can only go so far, and fiscal policy has got to go the rest of the way. So that didn't really get to what your bill says today. I listened to all these debates over and over again, and I just want us to sit down at some point as the representatives of the people of America and say, how much government are we really willing to pay for? Not that other guy over there, but all of us together. How much are we really willing to pay for? If we're honest about it, it's not nearly as much as sometimes we want to spend. And that means it's time for us to make some hard decisions about spending. That's not Ways and Means' job. I understand that. But somehow we've got to get those two discussions together in the same room. Until we do, we're playing a game. We need to quit playing that game. With that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Distinguished gentleman from the state of Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't realize that it didn't look far enough ahead that this may be our last Rules Committee meeting, and so it may be better that you did not give us time to prepare speeches in your to recognize your service. But I just wanted to make note of the fact, if it is, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Sessions, you have been a mentor, you've been a friend, heck, you've been my best man.
Yes, sir.
And you have been a great example for all of us here, and I just want to tell you that it will be hard to keep up to the same level of service that you have shown us in your tenure here. You've been more than fair to everybody that has come before this committee, to us that sit on the dais here, allowing unlimited debate, and that's not something a lot of people would do. But you have seen the importance of making sure that through us, the American people have a voice in these important matters. And so I applaud that. You've always held the people of this country, the Constitution of the United States, and this institution in the highest respect. And I just can't say enough about the level that you have helped all of us rise to in our service to our country. So
Thank you, sir.
appreciate that very much. I also just real briefly want to say I concur with many of the remarks that I've heard tonight. Chairman Brady, you said something about that we now have employers looking for employees. That's absolutely true in my district. It's just been a tremendous turnaround from just a few short years ago. I got to think that some of the work that you both have done, that we have done collectively, contributed some to the better economy that we're experiencing now. If you look at most economic indicators, they're all pointed in the right direction. And I heard an individual say not too long ago, kind of reminiscent of the 60s, give growth a chance. And that's what we're able to witness now. Growth in this country is at a tremendous pace. And I do want to also make note of the desire that you've expressed of, let's not wait another 30 years to take a hard look at our tax system. Let's make sure it's fine-tuned and the changes are made on a continuing basis, no matter who's in charge, Mr. Neal, that make sure that the business climate in our country is one that allows people to be as successful as they possibly can be, that allows the United States to be as competitive as possible in the world economy. And I think with that charge, Mr. Brady, you will have left a very important legacy behind into the future if we can follow that advice. So thank you both for bringing this forward, and I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Distinguished gentleman yields back his time. Distinguished gentleman from Freedom, Colorado, Mr. Buck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, I want to join everyone else here in thanking you for your service. The first week when you introduced me as a new member of the Rules Committee, you told everybody that the under and over on me was 7 weeks to last on this committee. And 100 weeks later, I am still here and very proud to have served on this committee with your leadership, and very proud to have learned from you. You have been a mentor to almost everybody in the House, and your style and fairness are an example, and I very much appreciate it. Mr. Brady was kind enough to call me yesterday and visit with me about life in general, and I have to tell you, I came in here with an open mind, and you have convinced me. I agree with you absolutely that we are overspending in this country, not undertaxing, and you have convinced me to vote against the spending bill this week.
Is this, where's that
great
gavel,
point.
Mr. Chairman?
Inquisition.
But we, in response to Mr. Burns' comments, we have attempted, we formed a committee earlier in the year, and we had that committee meet and receive testimony and debate, and leadership decided that it was too tough an issue. And leadership on both sides of the aisle, my understanding, on both sides of the Capitol, my understanding, decided that it was just too tough an issue. And until we get a backbone in Congress and we take on issues like that, we're going to continue to have unsustainable deficits. And it is, I think, incredibly sad that a good tax bill like this, a bill that reduces the burden on Americans, is caught up because we don't have the discipline to tackle the spending issue that we need to tackle. And so I thank you for your remarks earlier. You're incredibly persuasive, and I will look up at the board, and I hope that you have persuaded many others to act accordingly. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Distinguished gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. Gentlemen, both of you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Have taken a great deal of time. The seriousness by which you approach this issue is important to the nation. It's important to this Article I body, but perhaps more importantly, it is the spirit in which both of you have been able to approach not only doing your job, but getting your job done. Mr. Neal, will look forward to not only next year, your ability to effectively come and offer a pathway that you believe would be better. Mr. Brady, I want to thank you for your service. We did come in together.
Did.
I met you for the first time in
The courtroom in Madisonville, Texas.
Madisonville, Texas.
County Courthouse. We were
Fran
there for
Queen
town hall
introduced
meeting.
us, and it was a town hall meeting, but perhaps more importantly, your service during these times has been exemplary, and for you to follow the pathway that you saw that would bring economic growth and development, you should gain the standing for that too. So,
But
I wanna-
job well done, Mr. Chairman.
Well,
Job well done.
I want to thank both of you. I want to thank your staffs. I want to go back and once again thank Ms. Angus for her sincere appreciation of taking my phone calls sometimes when she didn't want to call me back. I want to thank distinguished former Deputy Staff Director, Mr. Towner French, who's here to watch this Rules Committee meeting tonight. I hope it's not our last meeting. We do need more. And I think we can be back to finish off a couple other items, but I want to thank both of you very much, and thank you for your service and your time here today. If you'll please make sure whatever you brought in writing, you do leave for awesome stenographer that will enable her to complete that record. Okay, we had previously had a brief discussion with distinguished gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern, about the circumstance we find ourselves in. I've not received the newest update, but believe that the Senate has not finished off their work yet, and so not knowing where they are on that bill, we don't know exactly what to offer in this rule as we approach it. But what we're going to do is be subject to the call of the chair. We're going to figure this out, and so we will be back. It is now about 6:15 in the East Coast, and we'll be back a little bit later tonight as we figure out the resolution of that paperwork from the Senate. So subject to call of the chair, Rules Committee stands at that point. Rules Committee come to order. Well, it appears reports of my demise have been greatly exaggerated, so here we go with Rules Committee again. The chair now being receipt of a motion from distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant a rule providing for the consideration of Senate amendment to H.R. 88, the Shiloh National Military Park Boundary Adjustment and Parker's Crossroad Battlefield Designation Act. The rule makes an order of motion offered by this chair, by the chair of the Committee on Ways and Means, or his designee, that the House concur to the Senate amendment on H.R. 88 with an amendment consisting of the text of the Rules Committee, print 115-87. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the motion. The rule provides that the Senate amendment and the motion shall be considered as read. The rule provides 1 hour of debate on the motion, equally divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking minority member of the Committee on Ways and Means. Section 2 of the rule provides that on any legislative day of the second session of the 115th Congress after December 23rd, 2018, the journal of the proceedings of the previous day shall be considered as approved, and the chair may at any time declare that the House adjourned to meet at a date and time to be announced by the chair and declaring the adjournment. Finally, Section 3 of the rule provides that the Speaker may appoint members to perform the duties of chair for the duration of the period addressed by Section 2.
Thank you very much. You've now heard the motion from the distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma. Is there amendment or discussion to that? Distinguished gentleman from Massachusetts.
I have no amendments, but I'm just a question. Do you really expect that, I mean, I know we'll debate and vote on the rule, but do you really expect that we'll vote on this tax bill?
It's hard to know. I would anticipate we are. That's why we're doing this. So we are going to take this rule, and we believe we're going to be in tomorrow and doing it. We believe, as the distinguished gentleman has heard, there are at least 3 major taxes that will hugely impact almost all of America. One is the tax on health insurance. That would be about $70 per person. Second is the tax on medical devices that will cause medical devices to not be made because, as you know, President Obama and House Democrats made sure they taxed them at manufacture, not at sale, which is very destructive to the industry. And lastly, the Cadillac tax, which means many, as I understand it, employer-provided health care, including union wages, will be taxed greatly. On top of that, we have the importance of understanding that we have natural disasters all across this country that people need to be able to understand now how they can begin paying for this, writing this off, getting the deductions that are necessary, and preparing for their new housing. As you know, lots of people in California, all across this country, there are major provisions that are in this bill that directly relate to how a person who is engaged in a business might be doing something tax-wise that's not right, and a person who is a whistleblower, rather than being fired by turning in somebody that is doing something wrong, will be protected directly by the IRS. It's a lot of work that has gone into this. On top of that, it provides an enormous opportunity for every single American who understands that we are not, as Chairman Brady said, we are not overtaxed, we overspend, and the American people need a chance to continue the economic growth and development that is important to this country. So
I appreciate it. That's way more information than I needed to know, but I appreciate it, yeah.
the gentleman, you know, had his time.
No, I know.
Is there other
Okay.
discussion that the committee would like on the McGovern amendment?
I don't have it, I just had a
Excuse me,
question whether we
a
could bring it up.
question.
Yeah, yeah. And you said yes.
So
Okay.
the gentleman might bring up an amendment here, but it is important that we do this bill. And so Republicans at the Rules Committee are ready and willing. Mr. Cheney is fired up about this, and so we're all here. Any amendment or discussion? We've now had the discussion, no amendment. Those in favor of the motion from the distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
Ayes have it, the ayes have it.
Ask for a roll call.
Gentlemen, ask for a roll call vote. Clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole. Aye. Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall. Aye. Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Collins. Aye. Mr. Collins, aye. Mr. Byrne. Mr. Newhouse. Aye. Mr. Newhouse, aye. Mr. Buck. Yep. Mr. Buck, aye. Ms. Cheney. Ms. Cheney, aye. Mr. McGovern.
No.
Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings. Mr. Polis. Mrs. Torres. Mrs. Torres, no. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk will report the total.
8 yeas, 2 nays.
The amendment, the motion is agreed to. Accordingly, I will be handling this for Republicans.
Ms. Torres will be handling it
Ms.
for the
Torres will be
Democrats.
handling this for Democrats. I would like to take time here for, excuse me, we do have a second motion, but before we get to that, I would like to take just a second and to thank the distinguished gentleman from Miami who has served as our staff director for these number of years, and I would like to thank him not only for his service to the committee, but the service to me personally for the work that he has done to make sure that we ably not only moved forward our work, but did the right things. And Mr. Steve Cody, I want to thank you and wish you luck as you head out of here. And I'm very, very proud of that service. Caroline Booth, another able member of your staff, and others have done a great service, not only for the committee, but me personally. I want to thank you very much. We're now going to move to the second rule. We'll move to, once again, this is 2 rules, 2 bills. The distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma for the purpose of a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant a rule that waives the requirement of Clause 6A of Rule 13 for a 2/3 vote to consider a report from the Committee on Rules on the same day it is presented to the House with respect to any resolution reported through the legislative day of December 24th, 2018. Section 2 of the rule provides that it shall be in order at any time through the calendar day of December 23rd, 2018 for the Speaker to entertain motions that the House suspend the rules as though under Clause 1 of Rule 15, and that the Speaker or his designee shall consult with the minority leader or her designee on the designation of any matter for consideration pursuant to this action, or section.
Thank you very much. You've now heard the motion from the distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma. Is there amendment or discussion to that? Seeing none, the vote will now be on the motion from the gentleman from Oklahoma. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, the ayes have it. Accordingly, I will be handling that second rule also.
And I'll handle it for us.
And the distinguished gentleman from Massachusetts will handle the second rule. Okay. Judge Hastings, if he were here, he would be asking me a question. And the answer is, I would ask for all members to remain flexible as we watch the Senate and continue to update our members. I promise to make sure that we do that so that if there's action that comes over here, we're a part of that.
And can I just make a suggestion for what it's worth? And that is if it's going to be late, maybe tomorrow morning would be a better time to do it rather than at midnight, and we promise we'll be good.
You will?
Yep.
If you'll promise you'll be good, I will take that into
Okay,
consideration.
thank you.
Because I don't think it's a bad idea.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you very
All
much.
right. Bye.
Okay, this finishes our work for the evening. Jim? I don't want to call it. Just so you know. Unless there's some demand to do that. That's why I said I.
We want to get that done.